welcome everybody to this special session on Gas Goes Green. I think, as I reflect, one of the most successful parts for me of the RIIO-1 price control has been its stimulation of innovation and bringing people together, people that have problems, have challenges, opportunities, with people and organizations that can come together and solve those problems. And I think a lot of the more successful innovation that has happened over the last 8 years has brought together lots of different parties with different bits of technologies in order to be able to solve the problems and the challenges. And this conference has been particularly successful in doing that. And normally we can all gather together and network and talk through our problems. I think this virtual platform has worked very well in helping to stimulate. So down to this particular session, agreeing a target of net zero by 2050 has been very much a game changer in terms of the way that we have been looking at the decarbonisation of energy. If you go to the previous target, the 80% target, then there was always somewhere to hide. Somebody else was going to solve the problem. But once you've accepted a target of net zero, then it's incumbent on everybody to rise to that challenge and deliver against that. So that really sets out the purpose of Gas Goes Green. Gas Goes Green brings together the engineering and market experience of the 5 gas networks, the 4 distribution networks, and National Grid's transmission network to develop the world's first net zero gas grid by replacing today's natural gas with hydrogen, both green and blue, biomethane, and bio-SNG. So the purpose of the programme is to demonstrate the role of decarbonised gas in the net zero energy system and the pathway necessary to deliver that, to coordinate the gas network delivery and innovation projects, and input to policy and regulatory framework decisions. And hopefully many of you had time yesterday to see the presentations specific on the programme, that the programme really umbrellas together. And the purpose of the programme is to engage effectively with stakeholders, to educate, to drive support for those policy and regulatory changes. And this conference is a major part of that process. So if we go back a year, I think the world of decarbonisation has changed a lot. And I think people would recognise now that there is no realistic, credible scenario of achieving net zero without hydrogen at the heart of that transition, particularly in the 2050 timescales. Our gas industry is renowned worldwide for our expertise, our competence, and our competitive market framework. 85% of the homes in the UK are heated by natural gas, and our gas networks transport 5 times more energy at peak than our electricity networks. And that really sets the scale of the challenge of decarbonising heat. But it's also worth recognising that diversity and resilience is a major feature of our energy system. And to meet this challenge of net zero by 2050, a whole system approach is necessary. I think, again, if you go back 12 months, people talk a lot about customers needing to change their expectations and change their requirements. I think today in this conference, again, reflects that we need to run smart, innovative energy systems and provide customers with what they need and when they need it. And it's for us as the energy industry to provide those solutions. So hydrogen-ready boilers are a technology that's familiar to customers connected to the gas network. They would meet the needs of their heating, hot water, and cooking needs. And it's worth reflecting on the water. 25% of our heat is for hot water. And most boilers that are sold today are combi boilers, and people get instantaneous hot water as and when they need it. And people have got very much used to having water literally when they want it. So it's a known technology from a customer perspective. And by repurposing the gas network, we can deliver early against the net zero target with a £13 billion per annum saving over alternative technologies. The network's RIIO2 investment plans are aligned to the Prime Minister's recently announced 10-point plan for the green industrial revolution. And we're going to have opportunity to dig into that in a little bit more detail in the panel session. But the plan builds on the evidence base and accelerates the work to investigate the use of hydrogen for decarbonising heating, developing a hydrogen neighbourhood by 2023, a large-scale village by 2025, and set out the plans for a hydrogen town by the end of the decade. The 10-point plan seeks to build 5 gigawatts of production by 2030, to have 2 industrial clusters by the mid-2020s, and a further 2 by 2030. And alongside that, demonstrate 20% blending of hydrogen within natural gas network by 2023. And blue hydrogen requires the commercialization of carbon capture, utilization and storage. And the government has increased the funding available to £1 billion in order to be able to do that. And over the RIIO2 period, the networks plan to invest over 900 million in hydrogen-related technical and operational innovation projects over the period of the next price control. We have been investing in world-leading innovation in the development of hydrogen networks since the start of Northern Gas Network's Leeds City Metropolitan Project H21, which took place and was delivered in 2016. And I think it's probably fair to say that the industry felt that this was a little bit out there at the time. And it is amazing the shift that has been made since then and the work that has been done to reinforce those outcomes and take those outcomes forward. With Cadence High Deploy project, we've been blending up to 20% hydrogen in the natural gas network at Keele University on their private system, on their private network. And there's a mix of housing and university buildings on that site to demonstrate the safety aspects and that actually we can deliver up to 20% blending without affecting customers and start that decarbonisation journey. And later this month, we moved the High Deploy project forward in Winlayton in Northern Gas Networks territory, where we will be blending hydrogen into Northern Gas Networks public network. We have built a 100% hydrogen network and houses on the DMVGL test site in Cumbria, the appropriately named High Street, which hopefully you've seen the recent announcements with respect to that. And last week we were very pleased to see that the SGM team had got regulatory funding approval for the H100 project in Fife, manufacturing green hydrogen from an offshore wind farm, building a new network and offering the first 100% hydrogen heated homes. And customers will have the choice of transferring onto the new network or staying on the existing network. And then we have National Grid's High NTS project, which looks at the bulk transportation system, and therefore the opportunity to develop the hydrogen economy at scale. And I'm sure Tony will love to elaborate further on that in the later session. But I want to reiterate that point that innovation and progress is really made through collaboration and the delivery of that collaboration. So in conclusion, we support the ambitious decarbonisation targets. There is no single technology available, and creating choice for customers, I think, is going to be key around delivery. Hydrogen production and utilisation will begin with industrial clusters and blending and move on through transportation and heat. No matter how good we are on our engineering and technology, the technological solutions must be compelling for customers, because at the end of the day, we will need to be converting and changing customers, whatever choice of technology that they take. And if customers aren't compelled to make those choices, then it's going to be very difficult to deliver against the target. And mandating hydrogen-ready boilers by 2025, I think, is a no-regret step. It also supports domestic jobs and investments in the UK supply chains. A world-leading hydrogen economy could add up to 18 billion gross value added and 221,000 jobs by 2050, and an opportunity to create jobs in all regions of the UK. And what we need to be able to do that is a clear policy, a clear direction, and a regulatory framework that allows investors that opportunity to make investments. We operate a world-leading gas network today, and we can operate a world-leading decarbonised gas network in the future. Thank you, Tom.
Many thanks, Chris. That's really set us up for the rest of today's discussion very well, and raised lots of points which I'm sure we can pick up in the panel discussion later on. First, though, I'd now like to provide an overview for those who've joined us today on what they can expect from our hydrogen network plan that ENA will soon be publishing. And this really picks up and sets out a plan to structure that vision that Chris had just been setting out there, in terms of the network response to the net zero challenge and to deliver on that 10-point plan. Our hydrogen network plan is a detailed and practical plan for how Britain's gas network companies will transition the country's gas networks away from delivering natural gas to delivering hydrogen instead. And as I was saying, it provides that roadmap for meeting the UK's hydrogen ambitions, including those that were set out in the 10-point plan for the Green Industrial Revolution that Chris was mentioning. Our hydrogen network plan will show how this transition will enable Britain to decarbonise hard-to-reach sectors, and we'll be focusing on industry, heavy transport, domestic heating, as well as how the transition of the gas network can support enabling higher volumes of renewable electricity generation. And overall, we'll be putting forward evidence to support how these changes can reduce 40 million tonnes of CO2 emissions a year, which is around 11% of the UK's total CO2 emissions. So a very important contribution as we move towards net zero. The plan will set out the projects that the gas networks will carry out to enable 100% hydrogen to be transported for use in those sectors that I mentioned: households, industry, transport, and the power sector. And it will highlight the remaining policy gaps that need to be filled, identifying actions that the networks need to take to deliver the transformation, and those wider set of actions that are needed to provide for sufficient storage and hydrogen production. As you'll be able to read more about when the plan is published in a few weeks, we see there being 4 different stages to the hydrogen transformation. First, over the next 4 or 5 years, the gas network companies will be preparing for the transition, and this will include completing the hydrogen safety case, trialing 100% hydrogen in homes, as Chris was mentioning, and carrying out network modeling to ensure that security of supply can be maintained. And undertaking this work will give government the information required to make policy decisions on the conversion of the networks. And during this preparation stage, blends of up to 20% hydrogen can proceed, and billing on the basis of energy content rather than on volume can be rolled out throughout the UK. The second stage, in the late 2020s, can see networks carrying out solution pilots. And these will include larger hydrogen domestic pilots. And during this time, hydrogen in the transport sector, use in the transport sector will increase too, supported by the networks. Next, in the 2030s, the networks will scale up, and building new hydrogen pipelines will enable industrial clusters to decarbonize, but also dispersed industry between those clusters to take advantage of those networks. With the Iron Mains risk reduction program completed during this time, rollout of the 100% hydrogen conversion for use in homes can then begin, and that'll also then support further transport making use of hydrogen. And finally, then in the 2040s, the full transition will occur with the national hydrogen network in place and hydrogen a normal part of training for gas safe engineers. To deliver the hydrogen transformation for households, transport industry and power sectors, our hydrogen plan establishes 4 tenets, and we see these as guiding principles for the conversion. We have guaranteeing safety, ensuring security of supply, focusing on people's needs, and delivering jobs and investment as these critical tenets to guide our projects and how the conversion is rolled out in practice. And in the report, you'll be able to read about these tenets and how the networks will be adhering to them. The report will also set out the implications and the benefits of hydrogen for the 4 sectors that I've mentioned. And it will also demonstrate that the networks have experience of delivering the scale of transition needed for meeting net zero. For example, the natural gas introduction in the 1960s and the different engineering, policy, regulatory issues that had to be overcome in that during that change. And of course, with the modernization of the networks that's been going on since 2002 with the Iron Main risk reduction program. In the plan, we're also giving consideration and study to how to maintain current levels of security of supply during the transition, how to fund it in a way that continues to be affordable to customers, to minimize fuel poverty, to maintain industrial competitiveness, as well as to meet the net zero emissions targets, interim carbon budgets, and to ensure that the networks can be demonstrably safe. Now, the final sort of taste of the plan that I want to discuss is who was involved in its development. And although it is a hydrogen network plan, we did undertake considerable engagement to develop the plan and test the practical transition options that it details. And we ran a series of workshops and collected views from around 200 participants to feed in and to shape that work. And views covered producers, transporters, industrial users, consumer groups, and policy experts. So a big thank you to all of them for their input and shaping that document. So I hope that's given a good taste of what you can expect in the plan. It will be out in the next week or so, and we look forward to discussing it further in the coming weeks and months. For the next part of our session today, I'd now like to pass to Laura, who's going to moderate our panel discussion on how the networks will deliver the hydrogen transition. Laura, it's over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Thomas. And great to have the introduction from Chris to give us the sort of overview and the ambition for the networks as we go forward. I just, like to obviously introduce all the participants on this panel, but maybe to set some context. And obviously, Chris was talking about the 10-point plan, but even since the 10-point plan, we've had now higher ambitions from the Prime Minister in terms of speed, which will really need to accelerate all our actions in the hydrogen arena. And also today with the Climate Change Committee report that talks about sort of a blended heat environment, but also, again, looking at these dates and ensuring that we're in a position to meet our targets in a timely, efficient, and I think very importantly, Thomas, you talked about customer-friendly way. I mean, I have a great belief in hydrogen in terms of consumers, because I see that it's something that the sector does all the heavy lifting, with less of the heavy lifting having to be done by consumers. But I'm sure that we all agree that it will be quite a mixed picture, and it will be location, location, location when we start to look at the deployment across the landscape. And decarbonising heat, as we know, is the big issue that needs to be addressed. So I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined by Greg Dodd from Northern Gas Networks, Anthony Green from National Grid Gas Transmission, Gus McIntosh, a colleague of mine from SGN, Angela Needle from Cadent, Anthony Green. Oh, I think we've got him twice. My word, he's come up as a double appearance. Chris Clark from Wales and West Utilities, and again an old friend of mine, Doug Parr from Greenpeace. So welcome to you all. I just wanted to kick off really with Anthony. When we start to look at the plans that we need to deliver, and I mean, how do you see the challenges, but the opportunities of transitioning the existing gas transmission network from methane to hydrogen?
So, I mean, thanks, Laura, for that introduction. I think the challenges with the transmission network are it's largely a steel network, and there are clearly challenges associated with carrying hydrogen in a transmission asset that's constructed of a metallics. We're doing an awful lot of research at the moment, and people will have seen, as Chris referenced just a short while ago, that Ofgem have given us funding for Future Grid, which is our offline test facility that we propose to start building in April next year. We're going to decommission some of our assets from around the country and bring them into DNVGL's test site at Spade Adam, and take them up through 2%, then to 20%, then up to 100% hydrogen, to really see how they perform. Are the materials going to be impacted? Are the seals on valves going to be impacted? Is the control and instrumentation equipment adequate for what we need to be able to do? So we're going into an awful lot of detail in an offline, very safe environment, first of all, to explore the art of the possible there. But we're also collaborating very heavily with our European colleagues, and there's a lot of research going on in European TSOs. And some of our colleagues over there have already put hydrogen into transmission pipelines. Gazuni have got 70% hydrogen running in a feeder at the moment, and it's been running there for 2 years with no problems. So we know it can be done, but we want to prove it ourselves. So it's a staged approach to understanding the risks, and then whatever mitigations we need to be able to put in place.
I think that's a very important point about learning from others. And I think also in Asia, where there are quite a few really, really good examples, France as well, where actually they've moved quite quickly. And I think Europe's got a very strong sort of hydrogen agenda that they've been announcing over the last year. Angela, I just wondered, when we start to look at very first steps, and first steps are really important for us to move towards our accelerated timetable. When you look at blending, how far do you think we can go? What are the barriers that we need to overcome?
So blending for me is one of those sort of no regrets steps. And whilst there are barriers, so we've got to address things like billing, and we've got to make sure that we don't exceed a certain proportion of hydrogen in the network at any one time. These are minor in comparison to the value that blending can bring, which is really stimulating production. So, you know, those who are hydrogen producers, you know, we need a place for it to go above and beyond industry and transport, which is sort of the early adopters of hydrogen, if you like. But just to balance the industrial system, you're going to need a place to put that hydrogen. And also, putting hydrogen in the gas grid allows consumers to buy it, you know, in the same way that you can buy green electricity for your home. I could see people buying green gas in addition to biomethane that they can do today, that really makes people start to think that this is something that is, you know, on the journey and transition to. So yes, there are barriers, but they're actually quite small in comparison to some of the other big problems that we've got to solve.
And I just wondered on that whether, you know, we're talking about lowering carbon intensity, or is this grey hydrogen at this moment just to test the system and safety designs?
No, so the test that we've been doing at Kiel is green hydrogen. It's created using electrolyzer. I think, you know, the support for blending and for as many projects as we can absolutely do, you know, having low carbon hydrogen is really important. You know, there are some transport projects that I know are using grey hydrogen, but it's just purely because there isn't sufficient hydrogen. But, you know, all our projects are very much low carbon hydrogen based, and that's quite important.
No, absolutely. Greg, I just wondered, from your perspective, you were very fast off in many ways in looking at the whole hydrogen economy and the sort of Leeds project, etc. What do you think is standing in our way? Are we moving fast enough?
Thanks, Laura. I think it's probably good, as Chris outlined in his overview, to recognise the progress that's been made, especially from a regulatory perspective. 18 months ago, whilst there was an understanding of the net zero challenges, there wasn't anything clear in place. So in the last 18 months, we've come a long way in meeting some of those regulatory challenges. I'd point to the final determinations this week that really set us up with a framework heavily influenced by the gas industry in enabling us to enact the 10-point plan. I think some of the barriers that still exist is from a network perspective, ensuring that there's appropriate cost recovery mechanisms as we start to outline this process and program of work through to delivering the 10-point plan and our hydrogen transformation plan. But also ensuring that you know, we maintain that focus on the safety case and ensure that we deliver the right outcomes for consumers. And most importantly, not stopping and kind of pausing on the progress that we've made. We need mechanisms that can start to enact this program of work and make sure we deliver on those outputs. We've got to a good point where there's a common line of sight, I think, between the likes of Ofgem, BEIS and the gas networks. And it's fundamental that we kind of keep the finger on the pulse and continue to deliver what we've set out in our plan.
So Gus, I mean, when we start to look at this actually in real pilots with real people and real homes, maybe you'd like to discuss a little bit about some of the opportunities but also challenges that one faces with the H100 project in Fife and the actual deployment of this in a real living environment.
Certainly. So, look, it's we've got a super exciting opportunity now in Fife, which forms part of the 10-point plan really for the hydrogen neighbourhood, where we're seeking to do the full end-to-end demonstration of the first hydrogen system. And there's sort of two key pieces of priority evidence here that we're trying to get to, and that is, you know, the evidence that of the suitability of the extensive gas network in GB, But most importantly, it's the customer value proposition, and it's making sure that what we're offering is something that customers want and need. And that kind of ties into our overarching narrative. Remember, it's not the role of distribution networks and system operators to choose the means of decarbonisation, rather than to be flexible to the emerging needs and responsive to the emerging changes in the industry. So I think key fundamentals of the trial are that it will be a safe trial, not a trial for safety. And laying it the way that we're doing, or installing it the way we're doing, is to give consumer choice throughout, and making sure that customers are not disadvantaged in any way through their participation in the project, but yet getting that critical information. Have we got the value proposition right?
And in many ways, there'll probably be quite a lot of sort of customer insight that we will gain through that process, and be able to use that right across other projects too. Chris, Wales and West does a lot of work, what I would call cross-sector, and I mean cross-vector within the energy sector, so with your electricity networks too. I wonder how you see that sort of collaboration through the whole heat decarbonisation, and sort of in some ways blended solutions as we go forward.
Yeah, so you're right. We have done quite a lot of work with West Power Distribution on hybrid heating systems. We've done whole systems analysis with SSEN and UK Power Networks, and we're currently involved with Compact hybrid boiler project with UK Power Networks. So we've kind of gone through that pain, perhaps, of working with colleagues in a different sector, which initially needed a little bit of understanding on both sides of the strengths and weaknesses of our proposition. But I think coming out of that comes a desperate need for a more integrated approach, and this is particularly true, I think, with hydrogen. The risk is what we're seeing is separate groups looking at hydrogen production and carbon capture and storage, and perhaps treating that as something different to its use in industry and in buildings, and that's something different to its transport and storage. And of course, we're seeing emerging views on very positive views on the use of hydrogen, particularly things like transport, as well as heat in industry, and of course backing up the power sector with flexible power generation. But again, these aren't necessarily being seen in an integrated way, a little bit piecemeal. And I've got to compliment some of the work the other networks have done on the clusters, and we're following right behind with South Wales in trying to encourage all these parties to come together to look at this as a system approach, and making sure that when we're building a pipeline, that we're thinking about it not just to supply one industry, but to potentially supply all the buildings in that area, and the power generation, and what about the transport as well. So I think my main concern at the moment, and urging people, is doing some great stuff, some individual trials, but the networks themselves, I think, strong advocates of pulling this all together into one place.
I mean, just picking up on that point, Chris, I mean, it's an interesting cultural issue. And I found that the energy sector really lives not just in a silo called the energy sector, but in its own vectors. And in many ways, this whole transition is what's called getting us out a lot more. Whether it be the transport solution, industrial customers, and sort of supply chain architecture in many ways. So I think it's a broadening moment for us all. And on a broadening moment, I'd love to introduce Doug Power, who, I mean, I'm just interested in your perception of what is going on in terms of the wider policy decarbonisation agenda, and where you see sort of hydrogen fitting into that, and particularly the role of networks in delivery.
Sure, really, really good question. Thanks, Laura. So I think I would characterise the UK decarbonisation as being, on the one hand, ambitious, but on the other hand, not terribly joined up. So reflecting some of the system points that have been already made. So, I mean, the perspective we bring on hydrogen is that It is a critical part of the system. I think it's the Heineken analogy. It reaches parts of the energy system that other bits can't reach. And so, however, we have to temper that with some very clear kind of, and this is something that I don't think government's quite got hold of yet, because net zero is really, really hard. And you can't do it by saying a bit of initiative over here and a bit over there and a bit over there. So that means that we're actually very skeptical about blue hydrogen. Not because we can't see a valuable role for hydrogen in system balancing for the electricity system, in industry, possibly in some of the in some transport applications, but because the amount of negative emissions we can deliver is almost certainly going to be sucked up by aviation and agriculture. It doesn't seem to me there's a lot of extra space there. And if you have something that becomes an important part of your system like blue hydrogen, where emissions are still present, both in extraction of hydrogen and during the process of carbon capture, where is that going to go? And that's what I mean by zero is hard. Zero is very hard. Our energy system has to be zero carbon because of the other stuff that's going to be even harder to decarbonize. And it was the CCC analysis that said when you look at the life cycle, it's about 60 to 85% emissions cuts compared with conventional gas boilers if you use blue hydrogen. So we're big supporters of green hydrogen. We do want to see it as part of a system. We do want to see more integrated system thinking. But I don't think the challenges of what we're trying to achieve with our decent ambition has yet been grasped.
So in some ways you're saying that blue hydrogen is a bit of an interim, and in many ways do we need to leapfrog and be very specific about green hydrogen?
I think we do need to hugely scale up green hydrogen as fast as we can, but actually, you know, even that, given where we are on renewables within the existing electricity system, I think we need to work quite hard on the electricity system to accommodate more and more variable renewables. And that is what the CCC was saying earlier today, that we do need to, you know, there's a lot of work to be done on that. Yes, of course, we should extract green hydrogen from the stuff that we can't send over to other countries through interconnection, we can't manage through demand response, or use for short-term storage. That's where hydrogen really comes to the party. And as I've said, you look at ammonia production for fertilizer, you look at steel and so on, you think, well, hydrogen is kind of our only option here. But we're some way from being able to produce large quantities of that. We need to, in the words of the CCC, start scaling up now. We need to start producing projects that are at some scale.
Yeah.
With a view to ultimately rolling them out in the late 2020s and early 2030s.
Now, I think scale and the whole supply chain is something that is absolutely at the heart of this. And, you know, what Chris was saying about, in many ways, engaging with a broader, more sort of with the whole supply chain and also cross-vector is absolutely crucial. Now, we have 2 questions, but I was wondering if other people wanted to put questions down. So I'm going to articulate these questions, and then if you'd like to just choose the bits that you feel most appropriate to what your interests are. So we had a question around the supply chain and the gross value added opportunity for the UK. Do we feel that we've got a supply chain that's going to be able to maximise the opportunities here? Or is this going to be, in many ways, captured by overseas manufacturing that actually starts to, in some ways, reduce the opportunities, reduce the wider economic opportunities? And then a very useful, important sort of challenge is, how does the panel answer Michael Liebrecht's point in his recent blog about the challenges and cost of replacing gas with hydrogen for space and water heating in particular? So maybe if we start with if I start with Anthony again, then that would be great.
Thanks, Laura. I was just looking at the next question, which was actually more applicable to me there. That we'll come back to in a moment.
I didn't catch that one. Announcements just ban on gas boilers, right? That one.
No. There's one about specifics around learning from other countries and why are we redoing some of the research in this country. If I can just pick that one up first, because it's quite important. Our assets have been operational at a transmission level for anything up to 50 years. They've been carrying methane through that time. Other countries have had their assets carrying methane and so on at different frequencies. They will have been under different pressure regimes. They will have been under different operational aspects. So we can take learning in principle from elsewhere, but we need to almost, I'll use the term calibrate against our own data set, against the way our specific assets have been operating. And that's the reason for wanting to do things specifically here in the UK. And we are sharing data backwards and forwards. So Fluxys are our partner on the project, and we're forming one data set with them. So if I come back to the GVA one, I think it's a really good point that Hugh's identified here. We're all able to sort of say the scale of the projects that we've got out there. If I talk about a potential conversion of, say, even a backbone of the national transmission network, it's a huge network. And if we're going to go through major capital projects in order to achieve that, the supply chain's got to be there to respond to it. So I think we're very early in that process where we're just scoping up what that looks like, and we are going to have to communicate more with the supply chain and build that up. There's going to be a lot of jobs out there for people in these areas, and I'm sure that my colleagues across the distribution networks would say the same. As for the other comment around Michael Liebrick's points in his detailed blogs, I'm not familiar with those blogs, I'm sorry, so maybe one of my colleagues can respond to that one.
Again, I'm going to add my question, which is you have to answer very, very quickly. But what are the one things that industry needs to do, and what is the one thing that policy needs to do to unlock these opportunities?
I think one thing that industry needs to do is move at pace, such that we can develop the evidence base. We then clearly need the policy to follow, because one thing has to follow another. If we're going to start hitting some of these targets for 2025, 2030, the challenge is to really move at pace on a number of fronts together. So that's where I would answer that.
Angela, I wondered the 2 questions or 3 questions that we've got about also the no regrets that some people have talked about gas boilers, about a ban on gas boilers, with hydrogen ready boilers being an option.
Yeah, so on the banning of gas boilers, I think it's just this a point of language, which is obviously missed in the press because we like a headline, don't we? So the current mood is that new build properties will be as energy efficient as possible and preferably not have a natural gas connection. So they'll be heat pump driven or some other way of delivering heat. I think there is an opportunity still to say, well, actually, those properties that are absolutely next to a gas grid and could be hydrogen enabled in the future is an opportunity there for us to discuss. And I'm really pleased that in the sort of recent CCC report, they talked about hydrogen ready boilers by 2025 and sort of low carbon heating solutions, of which includes hydrogen ready. So these things aren't set in stone yet, and we've got to remember that consumers at the end of all of this, and this is what I worry about, is that we miss out the fact that somebody's got a choice and they might want to choose some of these solutions. In the point about the blog from Michael Liebrick's blog, there's always very good points to be made about why a heat pump would win over a hydrogen boiler or a hybrid system. And it's on an individual property, it all makes sense. You've got a very energy efficient process when it comes to heat pumps. But again, when you add them all up, this is when it becomes tricky. If everybody has a heat pump, we've got massive issues when it comes to the resilience of our energy infrastructure. And also there's properties which will just really struggle to have a heat pump solution, just either because of space or the type of property it is. So we do need to be careful that we don't back ourselves into a corner from either loads of hydrogen or loads of heat pumps that doesn't leave room for that. The complexity actually that comes from both consumer choice and how regions are actually different.
Greg, can I come to you as well? Because we've had an interesting question here about how much of the existing pipelines are actually sort of what I would call hydrogen ready?
I think that's a question for me.
Specifically, but
yeah, a couple of points there. So how much of the pipeline network is hydrogen ready? Certainly for ourselves in our business plan, we've got round about 79%, I think, is all plastic network on the distribution side of things. And with our current investment plan, that goes up to 98 or 99% by 2032. So, is it hydrogen ready? Yes. It's hydrogen ready now. In reality, it'd just be better, lower cost, low carbon if we replace the plastic. I did want to pick up though on Michael Liebridge's point about, yes, there are many disadvantages to hydrogen, but there are many disadvantages to many of the solutions. And I think the problem we're getting ourselves into is this sort of electrification versus hydrogen debate, which is not particularly constructive. And it's certainly not evidence-based. So obviously lots of people have got opinions, and I suppose my plea for people is if you've got a particular opinion, then back it up with the evidence. And I think what the Energy Networks Association have been trying to do with the Pathways report that they commissioned last year was actually provide some of that evidence base to come up with some views and opinions and a pathway.
I mean, Chris, it sort of reminds you of the wind versus solar sort of standoff, and Doug will remember this as well. And actually, we need it all, and all of it is complementary, and all of it is important in terms of decarbonisation.
It is, but I just say there is an optimal mix, and the risk at the moment is these rather baseless sort of debates and opinions. Is we're not heading towards the optimum mix. So you're right. Is it solar versus wind? And no, it's both. But actually, there's a perfect mix to be had between solar and wind within a renewable energy system, and no one's talking about that. How much storage do we need in these systems? What's the value of nuclear on a whole systems perspective, not a levelized cost? So I think we really got to start getting some evidence out and not just keep relying on non-evidence based opinions.
Picking up from what Chris was saying, Greg, when you look at this optimal system, I wonder whether you and the ENA and the other networks have looked at this sort of what I call blended solution right across heat decarbonisation in the round.
Yeah, in terms of the work that's been doing, I mean, the key, I suppose, flagship project, led by Cadent and now being supported by Northern Gas Networks is the Hydroploy project. There's a significant amount, I can see the question around, engagement on the end user, significant amount of engagement for that particular project on how our consumers are impacted, and further works that we're looking to progress through the ENA program of work and NIA projects on how that end user impact now starts to affect industry, where it's a kind of a constant battle in understanding needs and expectations of customers, in addition to the technical aspects of what we need to deliver.
And Gus, are you going to be able to answer my question, which is, what are the key measures that we think government needs to do, but also that we need to do? Because I think that what we need to ensure is that the momentum is on both sides of, in some ways, the industry-government relationship.
No, I mean, I think actually in setting out the 10-point plan, that's a very pragmatic way forward. We're taking forward sort of minimum viable product with the likes of the hydrogen neighbourhood, the hydrogen towns, So in terms of developing hydrogen, that's a great starting point, but then need to obviously be responsive to what we evidence, what the customers want, and help to expedite that. I mean, a part of the program that we're developing is to get a wee bit more technical. You progress through technology readiness levels in terms of proving concepts and getting it to a point, and then in parallel with that, you have to progress through commercial readiness level, where eventually you can get to a point where something can be a merchant basis type solution. And the interim is really a role for government in looking at how best to support that and direct assistance as and where required. I think in terms of the overall, looking at across the whole system, I think we're actually doing a lot more on that than I think is discussed. For example, in Scotland, we've established a whole system charter between the network operators and system operators, and it's really important to get the foundation of information sharing right and not lose sight of what our role is in network operators and system operators. And going back to sort of what I said at the beginning, it's not to choose the means of decarbonisation, it's to make sure that ultimately we can deliver what the customer wants. And so I think, as Chris says, there's a whole lot of debate and opinions in there. And then there's the reality of, look, we also have to react collectively to what's happening and share all of the pertinent information, at least as the foundation for that in terms of the data and market indices and market indicators, before then actually incorporating it all into the solutions. So scenarios, for example, are useful as a point of indication, but you have to marry that with a bottom-up type approach as well. So from a government perspective, it's making sure that they recognise the challenges across the whole system, and that the appropriate support structures are there, and everything has the opportunity to be explored. Which I think, to be absolutely fair, the 10-point plan is very much in that space where it's looking right across all of the options and open mind as to which one or which ones will ultimately be the most appropriate for the UK.
Fantastic. And Doug, what do you think is, I mean, we've obviously got a heat strategy, which is meant to be coming out. We've got the white paper. We've got a slew of exciting announcements, but are they going to be specific enough, do you think, to actually create the plans that we need?
I'm rather nervous that they won't be, and that they'll be missing the system thinking that I think we've dwelt on a little bit. So, yes, of course, I mean, Greenpeace has got lots of things that it wants governments to do at any one time, and this is no exception. Probably the biggest thing I think is really missing in a big hole is what Energy Systems Catapult we're talking about on local area energy planning. Mm-hmm. Because if we get a system of heating, then actually it's best thought of in combination with the building fabric that you're trying to deal with. And at the moment, that kind of integration doesn't happen. And look, I made no bones about where I'm coming from on the blue hydrogen for heating thing. I don't think it's a good idea. But if government's going to plump for it, then you'll have what we can't do is say, well, everybody can choose what they want, and therefore we'll have to reinforce two networks and provide for two networks at the same time. I mean, obviously you can do that, but there's a big cost for that. And who's going to pay for it? Eventually you'll end up loading lots of costs onto consumers in order to allow for that kind of everybody to make their own choices within a local area. So that's a really knotty thing. It's back to what I said about actually, if you want net zero, it's really hard, and it's a lot harder than we're making out. And the idea that local authorities, who would probably be the people who would do this local area energy planning, who would be empowered with additional powers and money and resources, is kind of counter to the direction of travel in government for, well, probably several decades. And yet I don't see how proper heat and transport planning come to that is going to be done properly without that.
Well, I totally agree with you. And as a sort of a Ned on the Energy Systems Catapult, I think that their local energy planning process is absolutely crucial to getting the textural differences between different environments and different localities with the right solutions. This is an exciting time for energy, and it's a particularly exciting time for gas networks moving through the hydrogen transition. So I just hope we've all enjoyed very much our panel and all their contributions. And all I would say is that through the ENA, but through all the separate companies themselves, there is a very, very high level of energy involved in this transition. And I really sort of commend the pathway that you're all going down, but also urge us to go at a faster speed to actually start delivering some really exciting solutions there. So I just want to say thank you to the ENA and thank you to Gas Goes Green and to all the participants.
Many thanks, Laura. And thanks to the panelists as well. I know some of the panelists do have to leave us, so thank you to them in advance. The final part of today's agenda for this special Gas Goes Green session is to discuss some of the plans for discrete pieces of work that we have coming out next year. Our starting point for 2021 and the planning for that was similar to planning process for 2020. And this is to reflect what was set out in the Pathways to Net Zero research that we had published a little over a year ago in October 2019. And you can see on the chart here the high-level pathway set out on the 6 stages at the top, and the impact this has on changing gas consumption out to 2050. While through Gas Goes Green and other government, industry and individual initiatives, we are making progress towards net zero. From a Gas Goes Green perspective, we see ourselves very much still in the first stages, stage 1 and stage 2 of this 6-step pathway. And so our work for next year is heavily concentrated on preparing for the transition and facilitating more green gas connections. And you can see these steps taking place over the next few years of this pathway. So we believe that's the right focus for making short-term progress and seizing that momentum that Laura was just mentioning. We shared our plans for next year with our advisory group of 30 to 40 leading industry experts and gained their input, their insights. And our plans for next year are still structured against these 6 work streams that we've used this year. We still believe those are an appropriate way of structuring our work and ensuring that we have balance across policy issues, regulatory issues, and technical issues. So the work streams and our focus for next year is on projects that look at investment in net zero, what's required to get the necessary investment into driving forward the net zero agenda. The second work stream is on gas quality and safety. The third is on consumer options. The fourth is system enhancement. The fifth is hydrogen transformation. And we have a work stream on communication and engagement, which really wraps the whole project together. So what I want to do is set out within each of the work streams some of the work we have planned for next year and tell you a little bit more about what that might look like. So in work stream 1, we think it will be valuable to update our zero carbon commitment. The first version of this we published earlier this year in May. And with the gas networks now having received final determinations on their business plans for 2021 to 2026, early next year, we really want to take stock of that and see how much progress the gas networks will be able to make in the short term and really set out through which projects that progress will come. We want to investigate developing a strategy and some scenarios that are shared across gas and electricity networks and develop these in consultation with stakeholders from right across the industry. We think the shared view of the future and a common set of assumptions would really help drive forward some progress and address some key uncertainties. We also believe that it will be appropriate to update our hydrogen cost to consumer research. Hopefully you've seen the first version of this published earlier this year. It was always our intention to revise and refine this knowledge as new assumptions, new reports came to light, and as we have new resources to draw from. And we had identified the CCC's carbon budget published earlier today and the advice to government there as something that we could take stock on and do a new version to respond to. And likewise, the heat and building strategy that Laura mentioned and the hydrogen strategy that are coming up next year might also be important pieces of research to take stock on. We also want to continue to develop the local, national and regional pathways and planning studies that the networks have individually taken and progressed this year, following in the footsteps of the Greater Manchester Combined Authority study done for Cadent and ENW, and the study now underway for Scotland, being undertaken by SGN, National Grid and Scottish Government. So that's our first area of work for next year. The second is on gas quality and safety. And here we want to put together a shared industry view on all the activity that we see as needing to happen to enable blending of hydrogen up to 20% volume by 2023 to deliver on that 10-point plan. This will cover what the gas networks need to do, but also look at how the networks can support parties upstream and government and regulators in getting everything aligned to deliver on that ambition. In the consumer options work stream, we've identified 3 priorities for next year. The first is to engage consumers on the impact of the transition. And here we want to support and add to the evidence base on issues such as consumer preference, levels of engagement, willingness to spend, or indeed ability to pay. On a different customer base, we want to set out what is the role of networks in enabling industrial clusters or super places, looking at how the networks can support scalability and link up production and storage. And we want to assess options for off-grid communities. What can biomethane or hydrogen deliver for these communities? So our fourth work stream, our system enhancement work stream, here we want to continue to support green gas producers via the Entry Customer Forum. This is a new group that was launched a couple of months ago, and we've already received and discussed through this industry-wide forum a number of key initiatives which can resolve and take us forward on a standardized connection regime, allowing more green gas to be connected to the network and to enable that transition to greener supplies. We also want to look into the current stock of biogas CHP plants. So these are currently potentially receiving the renewables obligation or the feed-in tariff that might be coming to the end of those subsidy supports. So we want to look at what's the options for those plants. Could they be converted to provide green gas that's injected into the gas networks? What might sufficient support look like to enable those plants to convert? What's the size of the prize there? And also to consider that in a whole systems context. Is it more valuable for the networks as a whole that those plants are producing biomethane, or if they could be dispatchable assets, is that a better value for them? So on system enhancement in workstream 4, we've undergone in 2020 a review of some of the network activity looking at fugitive emissions on the network. And having evaluated existing activity, into next year we want to put our review of that current work into action and take forward some new projects to address some of the other areas. Our fifth work stream is on hydrogen transformation. We think Gas Goes Green should continue to support the joint industry and government hydrogen programme activities. And separate to this, we do want to take a closer look at what the contribution of hydrogen can be in the short term. For example, the contribution that hydrogen blending could make to the 5th and 6th carbon budgets. Can we set that out in clear terms? And then in workstream 6, we think it would be useful to develop a repository of green gas data and develop a public dashboard so that we can show the latest updates and changes in the network composition, the progress we are making, the gas networks are making towards net zero. And we also want to define the smart gas network and really demonstrate how pressure management could change the way the network is constituted and operated. So there are our plans for 2021, and there are many ways that you can get involved. And I'm very happy to take any questions about those specific ideas that were discussed there, our plans for next year. Let's see if there's questions asked. If you do have ideas that you'd like to discuss, you can get in touch with the ENA Gas Goes Green team at the email address faintly displayed on the slides there, gasgoesgreen@energynetworks.org. If you have a network innovation idea, you can submit it via the Smarter Networks portal. And please do sign up to receive Gas Goes Green news via the ENA website. This will make sure you're able to receive the further details about our 2021 plans when they become available, and ensure that you're able to receive news about our events which we're planning for next year. So I can't see any further program specific questions coming in, but my inbox is always open, and we do hope to generate some more ideas from conversations such as this. So please do get in touch over the next few days and weeks. So as we come to the end of the special session overall for Gas Goes Green, I'd like to say a huge thank you to our speakers, to you all for coming along and joining today, and special thanks to Laura for moderating the panel discussion. We're now heading into another live exhibition stand session, where you will all be able to chat with innovation project leaders and technology leaders on the stands in the innovation and exhibition halls. So do enjoy those discussions. And from me and the Gas Goes team for now, it's been a pleasure, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you all.